off officially. Some of you have already been coming in, thank you. And we were just beginning our conversation. But to introduce myself, I'm Elizabeth. My pronouns are she, her. I once upon a time had very long red curly hair, and I now have very short red curly hair because of lockdown. I am wearing a lot of woolly layers, so still haven't, spring hasn't quite arrived. And I am the chair of the Irish chapter of the Society of Young Publishers. And I won't go too much into the history of the SYP, but basically the Irish branch has been up and down the past few years. But we're hoping to re-kick it off this year because kind of more than ever, it's important that there's various channels that you can immediately access to assist with, particularly in the early years of publishing or just beginning to get into it. So this is the first in our series of Who's Who and What's What in Publishing. And this will be a webinar series. We'll have a couple more events in April and May. And caveat that this is the first webinar, so if mistakes are to be made, it's most likely to be this evening. So please bear with us. We're all learning together. And yes, as I said, we're kind of hosting this series to help people ask questions, hear stories, and perhaps things that might have happened in the flesh, we'll do over Zoom. And I think we probably all agree that publishing is as much about the people as the books. So it's great to have two people behind books with us today. So we have both Alison Hackett and Ivan O'Brien with us this evening. And I'm going to ask you both to introduce yourselves. So I'll just start with yourself, Alison, if you will.
Hey, hi, thanks, Elizabeth. And hello, everybody who's watching. So my name's Alison Hackett, and I set up a publishing house called 21st Century Renaissance in 2012. And I'm also the author of a book called The Visual Time Traveller. And just to describe me, I go by she or her, and I have a little bit of a grown out short haircut due to COVID, of course, missing the hairdresser. And behind me today, I'm up in an upper room in our house. So it's a nice bright room. And behind me, I have you can just see two of the framed prints from the Visual Time.
Admiring them, yeah, very nice. And Ivan, if you'll introduce yourself.
Sure, my name's Ivan O'Brien. I'm the Managing Director of the O'Brien Press, a publishing company set up by my father and grandfather in 1974. So we've been around a while. I'm a skinny bloke in his early 50s. I'm very short hair today because I got a COVID haircut by my wife yesterday evening. She did an absolutely fantastic job. And I'm just really looking forward to seeing the questions and learning and sharing with all of you here today.
That's brilliant. Thank you both. So I suppose the obvious question is, why publishing? So was publishing always your aim? Was it a gradual journey, or did you have some kind of lightning bolt moment? So Alison, may I start with you again, please?
Yeah, sure, Elizabeth. So I had an extremely ambitious project, which I just mentioned there earlier, The Visual Time Traveller, which I set about writing and creating in 2012. And this began to emerge as an ambition to publish 100 different pages of 5-year time jumps from 1500 right up to 2013, which is when I published it. And not only was I kind of researching the history that was going on in each of those 5 years and coming up with 12 facts for each of the 5 years, I decided that I would like some designers to create an image to go with one or more of the facts. And not only did I want them to create a design and an image, I didn't want any two to be the same. And I wanted each page, as you turn this book, to be a fresh approach. So it was very, very design driven. And I wanted to celebrate the whole concept of how design can communicate as much as words can communicate. So the ambition of this was so kind of enormous and all encompassing. I guess if I'd had enough time, we started developing prototypes and ideas for it, and I could have found a publisher maybe if I'd really, really waited. but I was kind of in a hurry, really wanted to do it, and I really wanted to do it my way. So kind of honoring the design. And it wasn't an enormous decision then to start deciding to invest in the design. So I was paying designers to come up with this very professional artwork. And that's not cheap. And I kind of realized at around that same time that there would be no publisher who would want to invest that level in a publication.
Yeah.
And I also realized that, you know, if I was investing in that and owning that, why would I give it to a publisher to then kind of make profit out of? So that was really the moment of, and I remember saying it to the designers, look, I'm going to publish this. So it was kind of pretty massive in one way, but in another way, I had done enough research to realize I just needed ISBN numbers. That was really the only thing that would be stopping me. But that was the reason. It was to ensure this book could be published as a book. And you need to be a publisher to publish a book. So, I mean, it isn't actually any more complicated than that, but I didn't really think about everything else until an awful lot later. So, but that's why I'm a publisher. And the publishing name became 21st Century Renaissance, which I actually had before I'd finalized the name of The Visual Time Traveler, mainly because I'd made this decision to kind of start on this journey, but I knew I wasn't only going to be doing this visual time traveler. I kind of knew I had an awful lot of other things I wanted to do. I'm very interested in a lot of things, and came up with this name to kind of describe me, actually, 21st Century Renaissance, because I really like trying to do things differently and not just going along the same old trodden path. I'm a bit of a devil for, you know, off I go in the other direction. But Renaissance and what the Renaissance means and the rebirth, I kind of felt, you know, I want a bit of a rebirth of the book in a way. And I know that sounds incredibly ambitious, but it's true. And everything I'm doing, I like the idea of collaboration and thinking about it differently and thinking across disciplines, which they did in the Renaissance. I mean, Michelangelo was both a scientist and an artist. So quite a long answer, but that's it.
That's fabulous. And there's many questions that we can go into, but we'll come back to that. Ivan, how about for yourself? Was it always publishing? Was there a similar to Alison at one moment? Or?
Well, it's a family company. So in some ways, I kind of got to give you two answers, one about the company and the other about me. So where the company came from is that my grandfather was communist, and when you were a communist in Ireland, you couldn't get a job, so he ended up setting up his own companies and being an employer. And basically all of Ireland's communists in those days were small businessmen. But no one told their stories, and so he started getting people to write stories and created books about notable Irish communists together with my father. And then they kind of realized that that was actually a thing called publishing, and that maybe just making these books wasn't enough. They needed to admit to what they were doing and talk about sales and all the rest of it. And so they created a publishing company. That's where O'Brien Press came from. My grandfather died almost immediately afterwards, after they published 2 books. So it's kind of my father's company, really.
Yeah.
The company was founded when I was 5. So I was there from the very early days of the company. And I do remember picking up the phone at home. You know, hello, and probably driving away customers. So it was just part of my upbringing. You know, we make books, that's what we do. And, you know, when I was in college studying science, you know, in undergraduate and postgraduate, evenings, weekends, and holidays was when I got to do the actual work of making books. And as well as, given my age, I'm quite techie and understood computers when they were still a very new thing. So I trained a lot of other organizations in Dublin how to use their own computers and all that. So I generated my income from that too. And then when I finished my year abroad for a little bit of
We're slightly losing you, Ivan, and you have us on tenterhooks here, so I'm hoping you'll come back. Generally, Zoom writes itself, but
you can still see me and hear me.
I can indeed. What we can do is, Alison, there's so many questions I want to ask you. One of which is, had you worked in anything else related to books? Like, had you been a bookseller or anything like that?
No, I hadn't. And my degree is maths and economics. So it is a little bit of an odd jump. And I was working for the Institute of Physics. Hi, Ivan. We went on with another question there. I'll be very brief. I was just telling Elizabeth that I didn't really have much related with publishing before I decided to get into it. Yeah. But I had I suppose I had loved the act of being published, because I've been writing a lot of letters to the papers since 2010.
Very good. Yeah, so the print word, yeah.
Oh yeah, and what a buzz. And I also knew that everything I'd done within the Institute of Physics was kind of about communications, and I loved how, I guess even then, the power of a well-written email. You know, you can get the result you want. So kind of the power of writing and the power of communication through image. So I loved the kind of advertising, or when we'd be doing a new project, that I would always get to see the posters, and I really loved that. So I guess it was a very strong communications, and I'm a teacher. I always taught maths. So those all, you know, publishing became a natural fit.
Yeah, it does fit.
Yeah.
Ivan, I think we were hearing about your year abroad, and then I think that was where we lost the story. I think we might be frozen again, unfortunately. But we can see when Ivan will be back. So Alison, I just have to put the spotlight on you once again. So,
that's okay.
Was there any like training that you tried to do specific to publishing, or did you just kind of try and learn on the job? Or I'm also quite unaware of how one even goes about setting up a company, because there are many small, like literal founded at the kitchen table presses.
Yeah. I didn't really, but I did do, once I kind of knew I was going to be a publisher, I knew I needed to take it sort of seriously. And you know, I kind of anticipated it wouldn't make money. And in a way, that's what's happened. I haven't in the initial stages, but I did I joined, there's a very, very good course, and I would recommend it actually for anybody who's in a small business, but especially in this kind of creative end. It's called Plato, and they run really excellent business advice programs, and it's very, very cheap. And I was able to go along once a week for 2 to 3 hours, and they would go through all the elements of what a business is and how you run a business.
It is a business, and I think sometimes, of course, it's literary, of course, it's that, but it is, things need to balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ivan, are you with us? We better get you back.
I think you are. Yeah.
I booted the rest of the company off their Zoom.
Perfect.
And various things they were doing, so hopefully we'll have stability now.
Great. I think where we left you, Ivan, you were coming back from a year abroad, and a decision was about to be made, I think.
Yeah, pure and simply, I joined the company at that point, and worked in various roles. You know, built our website initially, because those are skills I had.
Which is essential, and I'm sure, especially this past year, increasingly.
And then learned how to do production, how to actually make books, sending them to print, all that type of things. And then I worked in sales. So, you know, I've done most things in the company, other than editorial. I leave that to the people who know what they're at. I'm not an editor and wouldn't pretend to be. But, you know, it's good to have had a go in a whole bunch of roles, so I kind of have a fair idea what I'm talking about in most areas of publishing. And then the other side of that as well is that I've been part of Publishing Ireland. I've been a regular attender of Independent Publishers Guild stuff, Irish Copyright Licensing Authority, etc. And all that infrastructure and the helping each other is all really important, and learning and sharing.
Brilliant. So I guess we've talked a little bit about your publishing houses, but maybe you could tell us a little bit more, actually. So don't even know what that means. Alison, would you describe yourself as a very small niche publisher? I'm going to allow you to define it.
Okay. I am small. I mean, I've only got 5 different books. 2 of them have 2 versions, a collector's version at the moment. Another one coming this year, and 3 planned for next year. So I'm a small publisher. I would say at this point, I'm still hybrid in that I haven't been able to do an author's advance or royalties. And to get my foot in, I've had a little bit of help to ensure that I've been protecting the business really, with making sure that I'm not going to end up at a terrible loss if I publish somebody else. So, but my aim is to be a small niche. So it's very, very narrow what I want to do. And the visual time travel is a huge part of it. A publisher, but very kind of highly respected as, you know, producing really beautiful books that are beautiful and intelligent, you know, that what's going on in them is so important. So, and I have front-ended this business with an awful lot of content creation by myself, and then a huge focus now on the content that I'm bringing authors in. So very, very collaborative way I'm approaching this.
Brilliant. And Ivan, I know that the O'Brien Press, in my mind, sort of publish everything. But tell us about like O'Brien, and also like, is there something that makes an O'Brien book? So whether it's children's, whether it's nonfiction.
Yeah, we're a broad general publisher. You know, in broad strokes, we'll publish anything that we think we can get enough people to buy. You know, so we are commercial, but we're definitely not exclusively commercial. And we do quite a few books because they should be, because they deserve to be out there, and we kind of close our eyes and pretend that we're not going to lose money on them, knowing full well that we will. In terms of what we publish, we do about 40, 45 new books a year. So quite a lot. It's almost one a week when you do the sums on it, which is a bit scary. And more or less 50-50 children's and adults. And most of our books for big people are nonfiction, and most of our books for small people are fiction. But, you know, those lines are very significantly blurred. And, you know, while every book is an individual, there are some significant trends. So if you were to look at our children's publishing 7 or 8 years ago, most of our books would have been novels for 9 to 11-year-olds. Now, if you look at our children's publishing, most of our books are large format, full color picture books for both for young children and for children who are older, often nonfiction, as well as the fiction storybook. So things change and drift and meander. You know, is there something that makes something uniquely an O'Brien book? No, there isn't. And many of our books could be published by other people, but you know, you would be more likely to find left-leaning books, books with a strong female perspective. You know, there are lots of Irish history and places. We do a lot of stuff for tourists and visitors. We probably focus on that a little more than a lot of other publishers. So there are definite perspectives on the list. But you know, with general publishers, there isn't an either or. It's not like you draw a line and say, well, that's obviously a Gill book, and that's obviously an Hachette book, and that's definitely an O'Brien book or a Lilliput book. There's a large shared space, and very often it's look as to which author approaches or to which author you've approached, because so many published books come from the publisher, originate with us as the idea. Sometimes you're 2 minutes after someone else, like, dang. And sometimes you're just ahead.
It is doing a lot of things, yeah.
And then different publishers will publish things in a different way as well. And so the author's vision for a book and what they're trying to achieve is a large part of it as well. And very often you'll end up getting approached by an author because of a book that you've published. So, you know, we did The Bloodied Field by Michael Foley, which is a sports book, but with a twist, an interesting or complex sports book. So we get approached by authors with interesting or complex or slightly left field sports related books or history related books as a result of that. So there tends to be a bit of a chicken and egg or a self-perpetuating thing about the type of book that you publish for them.
Yeah, and it's like, I know as a reader, if I read something unexpected that I like, it's like, oh, I must find more of this. Yeah, so that's
which ties into the advice that I give to authors so often. You know, if they're wondering which publisher should I go with, I say, well, go into a bookshop, whether physical or virtual, and find the shelf that your book should be on. Who publishes the book beside it? They're your publisher, you know?
Brilliant. I like that. Yeah, both very interesting. And you're both, as we can all see, very different kinds of publishers. Do you both accept submissions, or how does that part of it work? Alison, maybe you'd...
Yeah, and I'd quite like to pick up on what Ivan said there, because I think it's really interesting that you were mentioning, Ivan, that you're publishing picture books, and then that for the adults it's fiction. Did I say that right?
Non-fiction. Non-fiction for big people and largely fiction for small people.
Yeah. So where I think in a way I'm similar is that I'm very much non-fiction at the minute. Fiction is not really for me, and it may not even be in this children's market, because the most recent book that I've published is it's kind of about learning, and it was pitched to be kind of for the adults as well as the kids. It has this linking haikus with these collective nouns. The Knot of Toads is the name of the book. So I think that's kind of quite interesting. And I guess where we're very different is this thing that I'm kind of small and very niche, and looking really to be a little bit more of a niche publisher, I think, as opposed to be the all-encompassing. And on submissions, I have actually been approached really a few times already, but it's always been people get their hands on a copy of The Visual Time Traveler, and I kind of know what happens. They think, yes, I want my book to be like this. And when they ask me, I sort of waken them up a little bit as to the cost of doing something like that. And I say, grand, you have a huge budget. So what I think is great for me is it's going to be a very unique selling point, because it's a highly unusual book. I don't think there's one actually anywhere else in the world quite like this. We, you know, celebrating the art and design, so kind of with so much intellectual purpose, I suppose. And then on the poetry, again, that's terribly small and niche, but I'm really, really care about what I'm doing. And I know at the moment I'm developing the cover for the next poetry book. And I just adore that process, you know, to be working with a graphic designer and to have that sort of visual editorial input. And I'm quite a big structural editor. So if anybody comes wanting to publish with me, I will want to be involved. So that won't be for everybody, but I'm also not in a position to take on anybody new at the moment.
Yeah. Ivan, you did mention that you are both approached and also approach. So maybe you could talk us through that a little bit more.
So we do accept submissions normally. At the moment, we've actually shut down our general submissions for a period because so much accumulated last year due to COVID. And one of the perils of email, of course, is that it's too easy to submit, and you get lots of submissions which are just kind of sprayed around. You look at it and you go, look, I know you've already sent that to 20 people. Why are you sending it to us? We're not even nearly the right publisher for it, which can be a bit frustrating. But in general, like, there have been years when we have published 0 books that were blind submissions.
Interesting, yeah.
Many years, you know, and, you know, sometimes you do 3 or 4 in a season. It's like, wow, look at all these books that have come into that channel, because an awful lot of books come from us brainstorming, us coming up with ideas, or hearing someone, or seeing something, or being concerned about a topic and going, well, there's someone who could write a book about this thing that there needs to be a book about.
Yeah.
And then you construct the project, or someone will send you something. And you look at it and you go, well, it's well written, but the book actually doesn't work. But we think this person could do something else, something different. Or do you have anything else in the bottom drawer, or whatever? So it's very often an extremely collaborative process with the author or authors.
With Alison as well, yeah.
It doesn't just kind of pop out of space. There's this conception from people who aren't involved in the publishing industry that an author gives you a thing, and then you print it, and then it appears in shops. And there's a good bit that happens between the author giving you a thing
and actually
you printing it.
That's a good opening to another question. Talk me through your timelines, perhaps. So, Ivan, could you give us an idea? Maybe, I know, as you said, like 50% children's. An average children's picture book. Talk us through. What's an average
book? You know, there's one book last year. I'll tell you very briefly about one that we did, which went relatively quickly, where I first had a conversation with an author at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday, and the book was available for pre-sale on our website at 6 o'clock the following Monday. Wow. And we sold 1,000 copies by the following morning. So, and it was appearing in people's hands 10 days after that. That's kind of unusual. That was the Stairlift Ascends, if anyone's interested. It came out of Twitter. Much more normally, you're talking about 18 months from beginning to end, probably. Yeah. That's what we'd like. It tends to end up being more like a year, but you'd really like a little bit more to do it right. In Ireland, we get away with editing, printing, and publishing relatively tightly. Yeah. So I can announce a book in March. The edit is done between March and May. It goes to the printer, and design then goes to printer, say July and August, appears in the shops in October. That works in Ireland. In the larger markets like the UK, you'd really want to be 3 or 4 months ahead of that. you know, you want to be really firmed up by February, March, and putting advanced reading copies in people's hands for an autumn publication and all that. Because we're a smaller market, we get away with being a bit tighter than that. Illustration for a picture book, you'd really want a year to do it right. So, you know, we have books which we're intending to print next April, and we're worrying a bit that they haven't got to the illustrator yet. And we'd really like to have them with the illustrator next month. It'll probably be June or July, and it'll be a little tight. Because it takes that much time to do it right. And it needs to go through multiple iterations and take in feedback and integrate that properly, because in our market, which is so small, unless you're publishing a 6-week book in terms of the selling time frame, a book needs to have legs. It needs to be sold on recommends. It needs to retain its place in the bookshop because it's really, really good. And getting those reader recommends and having something good enough to earn its place over an extended time frame in a bookshop requires a significant quality threshold to be passed. And because we're a small island next to a very big island, our books are directly compared with the best that London can produce. And the best that London can produce is pretty damn good. So our books have to be at least as good, at least as cheap, at least as well marketed. And we have to do all that in our small market, which means that we need that book to sell, with the exception of the odd 6-week hit, you know, for 2, 3, 4, 10 years through multiple printings. So it has to be really good, and it has to take the time. So to get back to the book I mentioned earlier, The Bloodied Field, that was originally intended for publication a year before it came out. But we realized in mid-July, the editor made the call, and she said, this is not going to be good enough. We could publish it, but it won't be good enough. It needs another year, and we gave it another year, and thank goodness we did.
It's great. It's coming across from both of you, the real commitment and care for every book. Every book is, so important, and you can't redo it. It's once, and that's that. I guess, I don't know, even this is such an impossible question to answer, really, because I'm going to ask about your role and your responsibilities. But Alison, I'm actually unsure. Are you a one-person enterprise, or?
I have been for the last 9 years. And that's been like any business where you do everything at the beginning. And so not only was I becoming a publisher, but I was also the kind of entire content and sort of research and development creator, and built the websites and tried to manage my online selling. So that has been very challenging. And I think it was really interesting actually preparing for today, because I was looking at a few of the business sites, not actually about publishing, but reminding myself of what a business is. And it's a fantastic reminder, because I can see where my problems are actually. And I think for anybody listening or watching, I mean, if you don't mind me reading them out, I think they're incredibly useful. So, and it was nice hearing Ivan explain there the timeframes, because, you know, mine have been, I would call my business so far has been kind of hiccupy. You know, there was this enormous hiccup of the visual time traveler. And then, you know, there was, you know, a poetry book I did, which was so connected with a personal kind of grief story, and essentially a vanity publish, I guess. But I just needed to churn all this stuff out of my system. And I'm only beginning to kind of balance out now and really understand I need to think about it as a business and what I want this business to be. And I loved this part. I was looking up, there's a book about teaching yourself. It's kind of a personal MBA, and there were just some brilliant outlines. So there's 5 parts to any business. So I think this is useful whether you're a publisher or whether you have happened across this webinar and you're not a publisher, but you are running a small business.
I have found myself in webinars and I'm,
Exactly. So the 5 parts are that you create and deliver something of value. Number 2, that other people want or need.
As I've mentioned,
at a price they're willing to pay. Number 4, in a way that satisfies the customer's needs and expectations. And number 5, so that the business brings in a sufficient profit to make it worthwhile for the owner to continue its operation. So these 5 things are connected with value creation, marketing, sales, value delivery, and finance. And I know my gaps have been on the finance, the sales, the bringing in the money. I know I'm creating good value, and I know I deliver. And I've got some of the marketing right.
Yeah.
But what I loved here was just, if you can bear with me, a follow-on, which, and I'm really reading this and really thinking about it, because I have over the last 9 years thought, will I just stop? Am I doing the wrong thing here? But I kind of know I have such kind of enthusiasm for what I do. I just sort of tend to pop back up and have another idea. I don't mind rejection. I kind of just think, well, I wasn't a good fit. Let's go again. And I've just, by turning into a company, it has made me put manners on the business though. And now that I have, a co-director, and we just have to make more sensible decisions. And I think that's really going to help my business. And I know they say you should spend no more than maybe 20% delivering your business. Really 80% should be on strategy and planning and, the future. And I think that's a really worth remembering. Most businesses at the beginning, you can't help but do everything,
Might be literally the opposite. Yeah.
I know, exactly. Me too. But the problem is, if you keep doing that, and here are the problems, a venture that doesn't create value for others is a hobby. A venture that doesn't attract attention is a flop. A venture that doesn't sell the value it creates is a non-profit. Now that one's really interesting to me, because I've been behaving like a non-profit, because I haven't been selling. A venture that doesn't deliver what it promises is a scam. A venture that doesn't bring in enough money to keep operating will inevitably close. So I think that's a fantastic kind of structure to think about your business and to think about where the gaps are within it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Ivan, you have kind of worked in everything in O'Brien, even telephone answers, shall we say. So what are your current responsibilities? And also maybe you might give us a bit of an idea. So I think of you as, would we call you a medium-sized publisher, or would we?
Yeah, well, micro by international standards, but by Irish
standards, yeah.
Yeah, there aren't many bigger than us, yes. Because it's by its nature a small industry in this small country. Publishing in general has a problem with profitability. To get back to what Alison's saying about money, it's really, really hard. And publishers span all the way from Arts Council supported purely for the art enterprises to very commercial and very focused enterprises at the other end. And publishing isn't just trade publishing either. You've got educational publishing and professional publishing and all these other areas that we tend to ignore or skip over. When people think publishing, they think novels for adults and ignore all of this other stuff that people publish. But as a commercial organization, we have to have enough of the numbers working at any given time. And when people ask me what I do personally, worry about money is the primary thing, because in publishing, we spend an awful lot of money over a very long time before we get anything back on anything. If an average book takes a year or 18 months before it hits the market, and if it takes 3 to 6 months before you start getting money back, which is normal enough, and we publish, say 40 books a year, that means at any given time, I have 60 long-term gambles ongoing before they come back. So the timeframes are huge. And as we've seen in the last year and a half, the world is changing on a week-to-week basis. And we're making large numbers of low-value, high-risk, long-term decisions and investments. So it's very much, as a business, it's out of alignment with an awful lot of the way the world works. And so worrying about money does have to be a lot of it. And everyone in publishing risks being a busy fool at any given time, because there are a million decisions to be made. I did hear a beautiful summary of the real challenge of publishing from, I'm pretty sure I know it was, a very well-known international publishing luminary, which is that the real challenge is dealing with the myriad of questions which are relatively straightforward quickly enough so that you've time to concentrate properly on the ones that aren't obvious and don't have easy answers. because you could pick apart every decision forever, and you could refuse to ever let any book go to print because it's not quite perfect. It's really hard at all levels: editorial, design, marketing, sales, cover design, don't get me started, to actually let something leave your desk and move on to the next phase.
Yeah.
And when you're doing that, and publishing is full of people with strong personalities. I mean, you wouldn't be in publishing if you didn't have a strong personality and you weren't passion driven, you'd do something sensible. So when you've got all those people in a room trying to align and create and market and sell a thing, it's really hard to get it out of one stage and move it on to the next without dragging it back, kicking and screaming to the previous phase, and go round in circles endlessly. And so my challenge really is kind of as a ringmaster, without being the boss in any meaningful sense, because everyone in the office is much better at what they do than I ever would.
And they're the boss of their particular area, shall we say? Yeah.
It's trying to chaperone all the projects through without pushing them unduly hard in a way that compromises what you get out the other end. And that's really what my challenge is.
And if I could come back in there, Elizabeth, that's really kind of relevant, I think, to how I'm doing it, which I didn't quite answer you. I diverted into that business thing.
Conversation diversion, as is publishing.
But I have been doing absolutely everything. But my whole challenge and plan for the rest of this year and for next year is I'm starting that delegation process. So I'm prior to an O'Brien press where I have employees. I have had a graphic designer on part-time for a while, and that's been great. But I have, a couple of really big things I'm planning for next year. So a huge part, as well as publishing 3 books, is I'm going to have a very strong video element. So I've already done this for the Visual Time Traveler. I've developed a whole it's going to be a YouTube channel, and it's me talking about and explaining the Visual Time Traveler. It's very
world of books, YouTube channels, and even book trailers. They're kind of increasing.
Yeah, and I want that with 21CR, the 21st Century Renaissance, that I can map the same way I'm planning with the Visual Time Traveler, that anyone who comes to the website, each of the authors, there'll be some video to go with it at their launch, or a little bit about their book, and that there'll be a YouTube channel behind that as well. So I'm engaging a video maker and somebody who's very, very good at video content. So they're going to manage that. They're also going to manage my whole YouTube thing. And I've brought back in the Visual Time Traveler graphic designer. So he's going to be looking after all the branding, all of the design that goes around this. And I've got a web developer. So I'm at the moment absolutely beginning to divest of things. This is kind of my big gamble now, because I'm spending a bit of money, but it's that I want to be the leader and be that, like you're saying, Ivan, I want to be saying, right, is this happening? Is that happening? And actually, when I was doing the Visual Time Traveler, the designer, Garrett, often said to me, he said, you're kind of a producer, Alison, because one of the things I know that is really beginning to work well for me is I'm incredibly collaborative. So if I work with somebody and I've worked with them over a number of years, they do incredible work for me without me having to pay the top. If you really were to price that, and that's because I'm in such a creative area, if you had priced what happened in the Visual Time Traveler, it's almost priceless, because the designers brought love to it and they loved it. And it's kind of turning out the same with the video makers. The day they came out and spent with me, they just loved it, because it's all storytelling. And I think that's what's so lovely. I loved your introduction there, Ivan, when you were talking about making a book. Like, a book is an amazing thing. And every single book, every single author, and every single kind of illustrator, each one is a unique thing. So each book a publisher has is its own unique selling product. So that's an amazing thing. But I am quite interested, because I think for any business, it is worth thinking about what is your overall unique selling point. And I think that's quite a challenge in publishing. It's quite easy for the author to do that, but it's quite a challenge, I think, in publishing, because there are lots of publishers, and now everybody's a publisher, because everybody publishes, self-publishes, and they publish every day on Facebook. So the whole world is kind of practicing it.
There are times when you can get a focused mission that might be part of what you do and not all of what you do. So, for example, in 1990, when we published Under the Hawthorn Tree by Marita Conlon McKenna, and we were told, Penguin, Puffin, they do all the children's books, you don't need to. And sure, no one will buy an Irish story anyway. And we published it, and it turned out they were all wrong, and that actually Irish history did have a place in the home and in the school and in places where children are. And then we very consciously said after that, right, nobody has facilitated us telling our story to ourselves for our children. We are going to do that. And we took on that mission very explicitly and consciously and deliberately. And then after a couple of years, we realized, okay, we have kids up to a certain age covered, but if we're going to be taken seriously as a children's publisher, we need to cover other age levels. And so with picture books, we started by buying Irish editions of Irish authored or Irish illustrated picture books published by UK publishers until we had enough volume and capacity there, and then started filling in the other blanks with young reader series, etc. And so that was very conscious list building. And similarly with the tourist books, very conscious list building. We wanted revenue that didn't rely on the gift purchases in the last quarter of the year. So what can we sell between June and August? Well, books for visitors, right? So let's make those. And so you do have that conscious list building and USP production there, which may or may not be the whole of your business. In our case, it was an element of it, and you patch the different bits together to construct the whole.
It's really nice, I am conscious of time, but this is all going great, and hopefully we'll get to some audience questions later. But the next thing I was going to do is, I did mention I'm in my first publishing role, and I am consistently learning new words, AI. I recently learned what a wet lithoproof is. But maybe you might share, like, I don't know, one of your newly acquired terms, or a term you think people don't quite know what it is and might need it to be clarified. Alison, have you anything you can...
I'm going to let Ivan take that first, because I haven't actually thought about that, but I'm going to think while he's talking.
You might, anything you can think of, particularly Ivan.
Sorry, my internet went a bit dodgy there for a minute. I didn't hear the question.
No problem. I'm looking for... I guess, like there's like in any industry, there's particular jargon or particular like abbreviations. Any helpful one to share? So I mentioned AI, or like advanced information that might go with a book, or...
Yeah, I remember I mentioned AI one time, an AI to a girlfriend of mine who was from down the country, and she wondered why I was talking about artificial insemination. There's so much jargon, and actually you don't realize, like I can't see the wood for the trees in that regard, because much.
And kind of, what is AI? I don't know what AI is.
So to my understanding, it's almost like a one sheet information about a forthcoming or current title. So you'd have perhaps the age group, you might have a very short, like 1 or 2 lines summary, and then a longer summary. You might have some key sales points, and then like some of the actual physical components of the book, like the size, how many pages, whether it's illustrated.
And does it stand for something?
Advanced information.
Okay.
I know, this is the kind of thing, but it's also refreshing to know that people working within publishing don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm such a self-taught publisher. I'd say there's dreadful gaps in my knowledge.
Yeah.
But sometimes I quite like not having jargon, because, you know, I never communicate it then. I just kind of go with the flow.
Perfect. Ivan's back with us. Ivan, you're muted. Ivan, you're... There you are.
My family assure me they're not on the internet too. No, I think formats are probably the worst. You know, what trade? What's a trade?
Yeah,
like, really?
Yeah. Well, yeah, so that's fine. I actually find that the most refreshing part of that question is that the people within the industry, people who've literally grown up in it, are like, oh, I you know, the words change, and it's just... And I always think, and I have to say, I'm lucky where I work as well. It's like, if you don't know what it means, just ask.
Exactly. Yeah. We all know what a book is.
Yeah, exactly. We'll start off with that. So I guess we're coming near the end, but maybe you might share either a small nightmare that you've lived through in the book world, or a fun, just an anecdote. I don't know who would like to take that first.
I'll go with my disaster.
Well, good for any kind of ice, doesn't it?
well, it wasn't actually a disaster, but my God, it felt like one. After, you know, this year and a half of intense preparation for the Visual Time Traveler, you know, this is the book here, you know, it's got all these lots of pages of, sorry, I'm not doing that very well, but, you know, it's a massive book.
Beautiful, yeah.
I had created a collector's one, as well as a regular one, really just on the advice that the book was so special, why not create a collector's one, which had some extra kind of pages in it. So all the rest of the contents were the same, but if you think about it, the publisher's page, this was a different book. So it had a separate ISBN number for the collector's one. And the day of launch, up in the RHA, all the books had arrived, a lot of them, in huge crates, and I'm trying to find them. And I can find lots of the regular one with the little kind of notes outside the boxes, you know, this one, and I had the ISBN number on it. Couldn't find this collector's one. And eventually found a box which said collectors on it, but the ISBN number was the same as this one. So this collector's book had exactly the same ISBN number as this one, registered separately. I nearly died. I found out about 5 minutes before launch. And the first sort of panicked, didn't really know what I could or should do. There were a few crazy phone calls, but then there was a collector actually buying the first copy of this. And I actually said to him, I'd done the launch and the launch speech and everything. We started selling them, and he said, I said, look, I don't know if I can actually sell you this. You know, it's got the wrong ISBN number. And he was very funny. He said, oh, don't worry. He said, I'll be out selling this now in the street later. He was obviously after an interesting edition. And so I went to the, I think somebody told me you can cross out the ISBN number and put in the correct one. So I crossed it out and put in the correct, it's 11 at the end instead of 04. But I wrote a long paragraph explaining what was happening, and that happened with the first one.
Makes it a double collector's edition.
Exactly. So the first 4 got a paragraph of me, and then there was like 300 people at the launch. So after that, I just had to try and catch as many as I could and tell them to correct it. Because it was too awful a thing to announce, but it all turned out okay. They actually, you can, so this is for the publishers watching, if that awful situation happens, I don't know if you can see that, but the designers.
Oh, very good. You have a very, very good sticker.
Yeah, they did an absolutely spot on. They had to, there was detail there that they had to make right the problem. But it was a really good example of editing where I knew it was a different ISBN number, but from the designer's point of view, that's not really in their head. They thought that page was identical in the 2 books. So but nothing's, you know, everything can be fixed.
That's also what's encouraging, because I have lived in fear of the ISBN, and now it's like, well, at very worst we can get it.
And you know what's interesting, there are a few people who have that book with the wrong ISBN number on it. So I kept some here that haven't been touched, because I think they're going to be really interesting. There's probably only about 18 or 20, because all the rest got changed. And then the people who bought them, that didn't get me to sign it and change it. So it's kind of an interesting provenance.
Excellent. Well, Ivan, would you like to share a nightmare or the opposite?
Oh, man. There's so many. Production, something, printer errors when where you spot, like there was one book last year where it came back from the printers, and normally, I wouldn't read it at that point, but I took one home and I just thought, look, I'll just read it, because I hadn't read the finished version in the manuscript, and I discovered a bunch of errors in it. And unfortunately, too many errors, just couldn't let it out. We had to pump the whole lot and reprint it. Kind of a freak save. There are just so many, and then actually,
and you haven't left yet, so it's the
trauma of them all. You purge them from your memory, and you remember the saves, I suppose. To get back to the stairlift ascends, like that I mentioned earlier. With that one, the big challenge was suddenly I had 1,000 web orders in one day, and normally you have 1 or 5 or 10. So we had to develop systems for finding the orders that weren't for that. There for dealing with that volume. on that title for that week or whatever. So you're constantly discovering new things. Like your editor, get back to your ISBN thing. The preprint checklists get longer and longer and longer every year.
Brilliant. Well, I think I know we had said that we might get each of you to ask each other a question, but before we do that, we actually have a few questions queued.
Okay.
So, I do notice, and I'd like to know, looking to get into the industry in Ireland. So Alison, would you take that first, and then
I was thinking about this earlier, and I think my experience is, you know, it was about the content, and I came at it as a writer and a creator. So, you know, I want to do the work. So publishing was sort of secondary to that. And I would say you need to really know what you value and what you want to do and how you want to sell that value if you're becoming a publisher. So that's the first thing, so sort of knowing about what you want, but also maybe a little bit of self-examination. Is it that you want to make money? Is it that you want to employ other people? Is it that you want to collaborate? Is it that you want to create this new value again? So I don't think it's an easy industry to go into, but I think we all love books. So in another way, it's not a hard one to go into. But like any business, I think you can run into the same problems that I talked about earlier. So I remember my accountant saying to me at one point, she said, you know, I let a lot of people in new businesses just kind of do their own accounts in their own way. And then they kind of learn the business. So I think by building my own websites, by actually being a creator, and the whole thing of once you're going to publish something, it is a little bit like putting it up on Facebook or putting up, say, the blogging. I started blogging around 2014. It's like you're suddenly aware other people are going to judge it. So I think a great question in publishing is, and I did do this now that I'm publishing other people, is they need to understand you're taking risk. Ivan identified that risk really well earlier on. And so you can get all sorts of people cross with their publisher, or, you know, I would still get some people saying to me, oh, how about you, have you gone to a publisher? You know, I'm saying, well, I am the publisher, but it's that a publisher takes an awful lot of risk. And you take kind of emotional risk as well, because you want success for your authors. So that's not to be underestimated. And I think if you're in publishing or thinking about getting into it, really examine what you want as a person yourself, because it's hard enough to carry your own risk. But once you start carrying other people's risk, you know, and then financial, and it's really serious financial risk. So these are stressful things. So you do need to want to do it. I love now that I have a co-director. That's been the best step forward for me. I feel like I've shed a whole load of stuff. We can share the decisions. And, you know, if it doesn't work out, we can close the business. It's not the end of the world. So I'm now beginning to kind of calculate and manage the risk. But to be really honest, the risk of writing The Visual Time Traveler and putting it out there, and actually writing poetry related to very, very personal journey on a personal level, that risk, it was kind of phenomenal. And I've sort of done the hardest thing in a way. So.
Yeah. Thank you. Ivan, what would you like to share?
Well, I mean, I cheated, obviously, by being born into it. But I'm going to take a look at like an employee perspective rather than a company founder thing, because it's a different thing.
Absolutely.
Something that a friend of mine who runs a publishing company in Britain said a few months ago to me that really struck with me is that, you know, they have a couple of vacancies, but they actually haven't filled them over the last year, because as far as they're concerned, publishing is really an apprenticeship business. Yes. You know, you learn by being beside somebody and picking it up as you go. And there are publishing masters and publishing courses, and they have value. And, you know, we've employed great people who have done those masters. But nothing can actually train you for the lunacy of what we do in a real publishing company. You know, by all means, do editorial skills courses, do, you know, proofreading training and all that. But in terms of how to actually get into the industry and get paid employment, you know, you need lots of unpaid work, unfortunately, because you're competing against lots of people who have, you know, whether that's working on a college magazine or, you know, whatever. There's so much experience out there. It's an industry that people really, really want to get into. Mm-hmm. You know, when hiring has been really hard in Ireland over the last couple of years with huge labor shortages, we have never had a shortage of people applying for jobs in the company because a lot of people want to get in there. So, you know, there is fierce competition to get in. But what I would always say is a publishing company is up to a quarter editorial and about 3/4 non-editorial. And I think the common perception that people have, quite apart from the fact publishers do nothing other than just print the author's words, is that everyone who works in publishing is an editor. And we're not. Most people who work in publishing are in sales or marketing or production or administration or all the other things. And there's an awful lot of sideways movement and experience building within publishing. So just because you come in through one area does not mean that that's going to be your career. So really, you know, if you see a door that's slightly ajar, push it.
Yes.
Stick your foot in it. Make sure that they can't kick you out of them. Get in that room and pick up your experience. And, you know, we're a medium-sized publisher, and most of our people, you know, we have job descriptions, but we all leak across. You know, we all do things that aren't at the heart of our job description. And as an employer, it's in my best interest to exploit the interests of the people who work for me. So if someone's going to be really passionate about doing something, even though it's not their core job, I'll find a way to get them to do that. And the stuff that is technically their core job that maybe they're not so driven by, I'll find someone else to do that. And so people are constantly shifting sideways within roles in all but the biggest of companies. And so you can gain the experience in the other areas. You know, someone who was our editorial director for years started in marketing. One of our senior editors now started on the front desk, you know, so.
Brilliant. And it's a very visual impact, yeah.
And the other side to that is that, you know, where people think that, oh, I want to work in publishing, I want to be an editor, is that actually a lot of people aren't suited to working as an editor, and it just doesn't work with their personality. It takes a very specific type of person, because an editor is very much a self-starter. They're working on their own, kind of in a little cave with an author on any given project, often 2 or 3 or 4 of them at the same time. And that's actually quite a challenging thing. It's not really as collaborative as an awful lot of other jobs are, and it can be quite lonely. So actually, you know, we've had people who came into the company who wanted to be editors, who ended up in other roles, and after a year or two saying, thank goodness, I'm not an editor. I couldn't do that. I wouldn't want to do that. And actually, I much prefer what I'm doing. I get to talk to other people about these amazing books, and I get influence in how they're created without having to worry about every dot and comma.
Brilliant.
Nice answer.
Very. We only have a couple of minutes, so what I might do, please, is I'll ask Alison to answer one question and Ivan another, and I will apologise to people whose question hasn't been answered, but hopefully they've gone about it in a roundabout way. We have one question here, Alison, and it's someone wondering if someone had 1 or 2 very unique ideas like you had for books that might not be something a traditional publisher is interested in, is developing the skills to self-publish worth it for 1 or 2 books, or would mainstream publishing be the only economical option?
So I feel like there might have been 2 questions there. So do you mind repeating it one, just so I can hear it again?
Absolutely, yeah. So oh, pardon me, I've lost it there. Here we go.
So can I answer that? The question was, if you've a unique idea, it might not be something a traditional publisher is interested in. Is developing the skills to self-publish worth it for 1 or 2 books, or would mainstream publishing be the only economic option? And for me, the key word in that is economical, because I think if you want to if you've got a book and an idea, you got to ask, why do you want that published? If what you want out of it is money, and economics are the driving thing, then there's a very different answer to if you just want the thing out there because it's in your heart and it's bursting to get out. And most authors are coming from that space.
Yes.
And you know, self-publishing works. It's really good. A lot of people are very, very successful at it. Most people in financial terms aren't even remotely successful. Most people in financial terms lose a lot of money, but that doesn't mean that the project has failed, because that might not be the motivation.
Yeah.
So I think you really have to look to your motivation. If, like Alison, you have an idea that you have a very focused idea conception of, and you know no one else will be willing to invest enough to make it happen that way, well, the only way of making that happen is by doing it yourself.
Yeah.
And so do that. But if you want it to look like another publisher's product, and if you want to use their sales and publicity and marketing machine and don't want to have to recreate that yourself, because that's really hard. Making the book is a quarter of the work. Getting it out there is the rest of it. Exactly. Then maybe a conventional publisher is for you. Sorry for taking your question there, Alison.
No, but that was the perfect answer. And there are big publishers that let you publish under their imprint and provide some of these services. I think Austin Macaulay does, for example, but you kind of do everything else. So that sounds perfect for some people who want to take the least risky in a way, or the most economical way to get their idea out there.
Well, I kind of refer to them as publishing services companies.
Yes.
So they will do whatever bank of services that you want, and you pay for it up front usually. Yeah. And then if they sell, then you may get the money back, but they probably won't do the sales and marketing. They'll just get to the making a book stage usually.
Yeah. Okay, well, what I'm going to do is kind of blend two very different questions together, if that even makes sense. Because one person was wondering, at the moment, there seems to be some extreme division in politics. Is there room for nuance in writing in 2021? And then it's not the same question, but it's sort of asking about the market. It's saying, is there any book that you wish you'd published, either that's come into your presses or has been published by someone else? So I guess it's looking at basically trends and what is coming up in submissions and not. So maybe
I can certainly say I haven't had anything. I'm too small a publisher, so there's nothing that I've seen someone else publish where I'd go, oh, I wish I'd published that. You know, that I'm not in that space. But the other question about is there room for nuance in writing in 2021? I completely think there is. I mean, I read very widely. I read a lot of poetry. I'm on the editorial. I'm an associate editor of Poets Reading the News at the moment. So I'm getting to read poetic kind of submissions, which are responding to the news. It's based in California. On the papers, I mean, some of the opinion writers, the writing is amazing. It's really, you're getting the information across. It's elegantly put. There must be some fantastic editors overseeing that writing, because that some people write very well and it comes out very quickly, but it always needs an editorial oversight. And even down to the sub editors, you know, they make it look right and all the style is right. So I think there absolutely is space for nuance. I think if you're only looking at Twitter and Facebook, absolutely not. I mean, there's just zero nuance there. So yeah, I do. I don't think that's changed at all. I think the style we like is different. I think there's much more room at the moment for the kind of short sentence and you know, that more breaks with paragraphs and things. And I don't think that matters. That's just, we're all kind of dealing with such a flood of information. To me, you do need to make it easy for people to digest it. And it's one of my beef actually with the more formal poetry journals. They're kind of insisting still on this dense page of lot of writing about poetry without sometimes even a line break. And you have to be so committed to read that, you know, especially if it's in the hard copy form where it's quite broad. Like even in newspaper breaks, it's writing into columns to make it easier for you. It's not easy to read right across a page and come back to the beginning of the page. So I think I've answered what that question was.
I think so too. Thank you. And Ivan, we'll allow you to either answer what you wish you'd published or the same question, and then I really will let everyone go.
I'll do both very briefly. One book recently that hit the shelves a couple of years ago that when I saw it, I was like, damn, was People Like Me by Lynn Moran. I wish that we had, you know, I thought it was going to be a year or two before she wrote that book, and I wish I'd approached her because that was so important and so good. I wish we'd done that. Is there room for nuance? Absolutely. I think one thing to remember about reading is that we're in a freakish, small, little corner of the cultural world. You know, the numbers that we do are laughably small. You know, tens or hundreds of thousands of people watch any given television program of any note. A couple of thousand will read a book in Ireland over the course of a year or two or five. You know, we're tiny anyway. We're niches in niches. And so every niche is different, and everyone, you know, the difference between a few hundred people and a few thousand people reading a thing is not really that big on the scale of things. You will always find, if it's good enough, you will find an interest in that. So if you cross that quality threshold, if you have interesting things to say or an interesting way to tell a story, it will find people who are interested in long form reading. And people worldwide. You know, one thing I didn't say about our company, we've always had a worldwide perspective. We've always tried to sell rights as well as selling books internationally. And yeah, we're a very thin proportion of the population in Ireland, but there are a lot more people like us worldwide. And, you know, one of the good things about the internet and, you know, Amazon and all that is that books can find their way to people who care about them worldwide in a way that they couldn't before. So a thin part of the world market can mean that you can justify doing things that wouldn't work for the niche interests in Ireland alone. It's just a matter of making the balance work. So yes, absolutely. Be as nuanced as you like.
Brilliant. I had said that I wouldn't ask another question, but I see someone has asked a question twice, so it might be essential that we get this out. It's from a recent graduate, and they do want to know, is previous experience necessary to get an entry-level role in Ireland? Or could you get an entry-level role without having done internship or work experience?
I think I've answered that to a point, which is that there are very few jobs, and lots of the people applying for the jobs have experience of some sort. And because we're small companies, and the minute you walk in the door, you are given responsibility. It's not like, here's the thing, do it and I'll check it and do it again.
Yeah.
You know, we simply don't have the money or the time to check and to redo stuff. So we need to be able to trust people the day they come in the door. And, you know, we've had a couple of less than ideal hires over the lifetime of the company. And boy, you remember each one because of the problems that come behind it. So because of the nature of the competition, you kind of need to be lucky with your timing, or write a damn good application letter, or have something to make you stand out among the people who have done the Masters in Galway, or who have been working on a poetry journal for 5 years, or whatever. It's just damn hard to get in that.
Absolutely. And then Alison.
And I was just going to add, at lunchtime, and I presume it'll be on the news maybe this evening, or maybe it's on the was on the 6 p.m. news. But the minister, Simon Harris, as Minister for Education, has announced this whole kind of ramping up of the apprenticeship system. Yeah. And I think that, you know, they had this huge problem. I actually wrote a letter to the paper about it. Back in 2015, there were 23 female apprenticeships out of 10 or 15,000, the rest being men. They now have around 1,000 are female. But these apprenticeships, I think, are more traditionally in things like plumbing and, you know, electrician and things like that, which is brilliant. I'm thrilled that they want to open this up, because I think one of the huge changes coming fast at us that the universities need to understand is, you know, the university degree isn't the be all and end all. There's lots of ways to get to where you want to get to. I'm a lifelong learner. My kids now learn everything online. It's phenomenal. And I think that it would be great for Publishing Ireland and the publishing industry to make sure we're included in that you can become an apprentice publisher or work in the publishing industry as an apprentice, and maybe pick 2 or 3 of the roles within publishing, because I think we need to be there with the other industries. And I think it would be a great way, because this is going to be funded to some extent by the government, but it would be good for the publishing industry to formalise that in Ireland and make it attractive that for people to come and do the apprenticeship. Because like you just said, Ivan, you only learn things when you do them. That's back to the old, I see and I forget, or I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand.
Yeah.
And the other side to it, which ties in there, actually in Germany, forever, they've had bookshop apprenticeships. Yes. And the other major route to get into publishing that you can actually earn a few bob while you're doing it, because, you know, there's a really good reason why publishing is dominated in Britain and Ireland by white middle class women, because they're the only ones who will put up with the graft and the lack of pay that it takes to actually get in the door. That's a real problem for the industry.
Yeah.
bookshops are a place where you can actually earn while trying to wheedle your way into the book industry, while getting things that a publisher will notice. I mean, we've employed people from shop floor bookselling. That's the other route that we've done. We've got a gap. We know this really good person in this shop. Let's see if she'll work for us. That's usually a she. So that is another way in as well. But you do need something to make yourself stand out. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, I can't thank you both enough, and thank you to everyone who's come along. I've had a great time. I know Alison certainly needs to eat her dinner. I believe I have a new choir practice to go to.
I do indeed.
Yeah. So much, and thank you to everyone who's come along, and follow us on Twitter. We'll have more events. And yeah, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Emil.
Thanks,
everybody.
Thanks
Bye.
everyone for coming.